It's the World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Daily Beast contributor Craig Kapitas is among us. How are you?
I'm praying that you don't raise the issue of the royal family this evening.
The royal family?
Harry and Meghan and all of them.
Oh.
You promised.
Okay, that's off the agenda.
Thank you.
Borzu Dargai, international correspondent for The Independent, is with us as well. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you
Pretty
so much.
good, okay. From Jerusalem, correspondent Iris Mockler joins us. How are things over there?
Good. I'm doing Christmas stories, so I'm run off my feet, but everyone else seems well.
It's that time of the year, Iris. Robert Parsons, chief foreign editor here at France 24, is with us. You're just back from assignment, Rob. Tell us what's in this picture here.
Yeah, that was a picture taken in Zaporizhia. We'd just started editing, and the lights went out.
The lights
Simple
went out.
as that, and it happened all the time. 2 hours on, 4 hours off, sometimes the other way around. You just had to keep your batteries charged. Fortunately, ours were, and we were able to finish off the edit. But it's nothing compared with what people are putting through on a daily basis in Ukraine at the moment.
And putting good out, making good with that miner's lamp on her head, we see. We'll be talking about Ukraine a little bit later on. You can listen, subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. The house always wins. What applies for casinos also applies for FIFA ahead of the closing weekend of the World Cup.
Unanimous praise of the FIFA Council for this World Cup, for the unique cohesive power that this World Cup has shown. The thanks to everyone who was involved, to, of course, Qatar, all the volunteers, workforce, all of you, everyone who has contributed to make this World Cup the best World Cup ever.
Borzu Dargai, the greatest World Cup ever.
I do say so myself about my own project. I mean, I think that kind of praise doesn't have a lot of value when it's from the person that is supposedly being praised. So I think that there has been it has come off fairly smoothly, the World Cup. I think that there is room for criticism of Qatar. For other aspects of its governance and track record on rights and so on. On the other hand, we should not go too far in criticizing it. Let's not forget that the last World Cup was held in Russia just a few years after it first invaded Ukraine. And we just, had an Olympic game in China. So, there's plenty of authoritarian regimes with which we do business with around the world that are not just Qatar.
Right, and FIFA certainly had the sporting gods on its side. France's 2-0 win over Morocco Wednesday, setting up a dream final for organizers. Kylian Mbappe's Les Bleus against Lionel Messi's Argentina on Paris's Champs-Élysées. Well, it felt like a win-win moment. The Lions of the Atlas had beaten the odds to reach the semifinals, and doing a nation and continent proud, as well as all the French who have roots on the other side of the Mediterranean.
I want to thank the Moroccan team. They played extremely well. They played not only for Moroccan country, but for all African country. I'm half French, half Senegalese. So first of all, thank you very much for the Moroccan team. Allez les Bleus!
Allez les Bleus, Robert Parsons. I'm not sure if the English are still smarting from the quarterfinals, but the
Hey, listen, it doesn't bother me. I'm Scottish, so I wasn't supporting them anyway.
I mean, it is a tale always this feel-good tale of globalization, isn't it? The fact that the French and the Moroccan fans were celebrating together.
Yeah, I mean, look also at where the Moroccan players come from. Most of them, I think, were born outside of Morocco. Yeah, but you're right. You're absolutely right. I think it is a celebration of that to a degree. And they served up a remarkable game as well. It was, although the French won and looked pretty comfortable, Morocco didn't look out of their league by any means.
Iris Mockler, ahead of the semifinal, you were reporting for us from Ramallah, and we were highlighting the fact that you had Israelis and Palestinians agreeing on the team to support in that case, which was Morocco. What about for the final?
For the final, well, let's start with Israelis. There are French-born Israelis and Argentinian-born Israelis, and I think they fall pretty easily. You can see where they might go. There are many Brazil supporters here, and I think they're going to support Argentina as well. So I'd say if I had to pick, that more Israelis will be supporting Argentina. On the Palestinian side, it's kind of the reverse, and it's partly because of Messi. Messi, when came here in 2013, a trip I didn't remember, but the Palestinians do remember, because although he and the other players from Barca went to Hebron, did a clinic for Palestinian footballers, they also went to Jerusalem, to the Western Wall, and the image of Messi praying with a Jewish skull cap on his head, they haven't forgiven him in the Palestinian territories. And what they said to me in Ramallah is, okay, now we're gonna go for France.
It's amazing. These are two marquee players, Lionel Messi and Kylian Mbappé, and they play for the same club, Craig Capitas. Qatar owned Paris Saint-Germain.
I know nothing about this sport. What I do know is that the unique and cohesive power that the FIFA boss is talking about, he should be thanking the unique and cohesive power of being headquartered in Switzerland, along with the IOC and UEFA, because they're protecting the corruption that is endemic in that. But they better wait, because as soon as they get to North America, they better go in with lawyers, because every time one of these organizations does something in the States, which they always say it's the greatest ever, it ends up in court. Look at the number of FIFA executives, people associated with FIFA, now either in jail or going to jail or on an indictment in the United States. Same thing with the IOC scandal back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there were congressional hearings. Let's get this FIFA boss in front of Congress. That'll be fun. Not being questioned by sports journalists, please, by real journalists.
Oh, well, we have real journalists who cover sports. I'll take offense to that.
I haven't seen them down there. I see a lot of rah.
All right. Well, speaking of Qatar, the EU embroiled in what could be its worst corruption scandal ever, and Doha is linked to it. Belgian federal police nabbing 1.5 million euros in cash. Doha denies greasing palms to get lawmakers to approve visa-free travel for its citizens. 4 arrests, including one of the European Parliament's 14 vice presidents. Greek Social Democrat Eva Kaili denies all, even though her own father was intercepted with a briefcase full of bills. That's got the Parliament president promising to fast-track a full overhaul of ethics rules.
Make no mistake, the European Parliament, dear colleagues, is under attack. European democracy is under attack. And our way of open, free, democratic societies are under attack.
Our panelists took exception to those words, Borzo Daragai, when we discussed this the other day, because they said it's not the EU under attack by some nefarious foreign force. They saw it, if I can push the football analogies, as an own goal.
I mean, this is an old story, politicians taking money. I mean, I'm just shocked at the small amount. I mean, 1.5 million euros is quite a bit of money, but, you know, when you're talking about Qatar, you're talking about a country that has, tens, hundreds of billions in gas reserves and so much money that's really, you sold yourself cheap, is what I would say.
Cash these days captures the imagination.
Yeah, but it's just not, it would not be enough. That kind of money would not get you a shipment of cocaine past, Antwerp. You would have to pay more for that. And these guys basically sold out their entire lives and professions for an amount of money that is, not that much. 10 years of their salary, essentially.
It's called Qatargate, but is that a fair comp, Craig Capitas, since it's possible that we don't know yet, but it's possible it could be Moroccan money involved. And a lot of the focus has been on Eva Kaili, this Greek member of the European Parliament who's been stripped of her title as one of the vice presidents of the chamber. But there are also plenty of Italians involved, and there could be more surprises to come.
Yeah, I think we should call it sandbox. It seems to be more evocative of what's going on. Yeah, well, look, what can one say other than the only way to look at a politician is down? And if this doesn't prove that this is how we should be covering these rummies who are in the EU, I don't know what does. You know, the corruption there has been rampant. And by the way, this is not a problem, as you were saying, that started 2 days ago. This has been going on for decades. So I think we have to ask, since where's the Brussels press corps? Where have they been in all this over the past 20-some years? Don't tell me they didn't know this kind of stuff was going on. Of course they did. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Why weren't these questions being asked? So I put a lot of this responsibility on our profession as well. Come on.
All right, so sports journalists and those who cover the Brussels beat in the crosshairs of Craig Kapitas.
Craig's got a point, you know, but on the other hand, you know, I haven't seen very much evidence to see that the European Union is any worse than, say, U.S. Congress, probably not even the same league.
But there is the reputational damage, and it's been pointed out that this has otherwise been. This was supposed to be a good.
Yeah, well, it
was supposed to be a good weekend for the EU. They just approved
not just a good
massive,
weekend, a good year.
Massive aid for
Hungary,
Ukraine, and they managed to come together.
Yeah. And they've managed to get put Hungary in the spotlight at last and make sure that they didn't get that 6.3 billion euros until they started falling into line on rule of law. But, you know, it has also been a good year in other respects. You mentioned Ukraine, getting together 18 billion to support Ukraine, withstanding the pressure from Russia, actually moving, on issues like gas. You know, Craig is right in the sense that there is corruption in the European Union. We know that. It's almost unavoidable. You know, there's going to be corruption. It's a massive organisation, you know, about 60,000 bureaucrats all gathered in one city. You know, it's going to be very hard to stop it happening. Whether they can do better, I mean, clearly they can. You know, not much is known about what sort of second jobs MEPs are doing, and they're not called to account very often. A lot more could be done to reveal it. And as for the point of the small sum of money, I completely agree with you. But maybe there's more to come.
Iris Makler, 1.5 million. Your thoughts?
That's what we know. That was what was in the suitcases. When I started reading, it was 600,000. Now it's 1.5 million. Maybe these are the suitcases that were found in these police raids. Who's to say there isn't previous months worth of many more hundreds of thousands or indeed millions of euros that were. I think what Qatar wanted was to buy influence, and it wanted to buy influence because it was worried about how it was perceived because of this World Cup. So this is just one of the ripples that comes out when I just heard Sepp Blatter, I was thinking about this a month ago, the man who organised this and now confesses or concedes that it was a bad idea and that he shouldn't have done it, and that he's going to be paying a lot for it. You know, that was the end of his career too. So I think that all of those things together, something that was begun in sin, born in sin, continues, and the ripples reach the EU.
They certainly have. Turning our attention, we mentioned Ukraine. It's not been the kind of year that Russia's president had banked on. Vladimir Putin scrapping what had been a holiday season tradition in Moscow, his marathon annual press conference. Here you see him this Friday at work, a Security Council meeting there. The press conference, one of those traditions where you saw Rob Parsons, those pro-Kremlin journalists, sometimes wearing attention-seeking garb to grab the leader's attention. Is it a big deal or not, the fact that officially now it's not cancelled but postponed?
Yeah, I think it's a big deal. You know, it's become such a part of the calendar in Russia, you know, over the years. For him to cancel at the last minute like that makes him look weak. Not clear what it is he's worrying about. You know, maybe he's become even more paranoid over the last year. We saw that performance with that ridiculous long table where he refused to engage with anybody. You know, at less than 50 meters, so however long that table was. Maybe he's just frightened of being in a large company like that. Maybe he's frightened of just a question coming through out of the blue, which he couldn't comfortably answer, that he would be put in the spotlight. Whatever the reason, he's backed away from it, and he will look weak as a consequence.
Borzadar guy?
I mean, I think that it's definitely not fear of COVID and so on, because when he goes to places like Iran or Central Asia and meets with other leaders, you see him palling around in very, very close quarters with other authoritarian dictators. So I think it's definitely what he said about the questions, the worry about questions that might be popped by a brave journalist, someone asking him about the situation with the war, with the draftees. There's a big threat against Putin from his own far right, from those people who think that he's prosecuting the war in Ukraine in a very flawed way, who think that he's not tough enough, that he's too globalist and too not nationalist enough. And I think that is more likely than not what he's afraid of, is someone asking him, why are our young men not being properly equipped to pursue your war in Ukraine?
Let me ask.
I could just add one thing. There's a fear, I think, on the part of the administration in Russia that they're losing control of the narrative as well. Opinion polls are not very trustworthy in Russia, but such as they are, they're showing that opposition to the war is growing fast.
Craig Kapitas, is that the worry for Vladimir Putin, his right flank?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him. Look, anyone who tells you they know what's going on in Russia or says they don't get drunk on champagne, never believe anything that comes out of their mouth. What we do know for certain is only we here in the West are really like, oh, look at this. He's not doing his annual pep rally. Doesn't matter a whit back in Russia. It matters.
Hang on. You say it doesn't matter, but this was for lots of people the only chance to.
Yeah, I think it matters.
Putin has the propaganda machine at Russian television, which over 80% of the people of Russia rely on for their information, locked up tighter than the proverbial drum. Now, the only people who are going to make a deal about this in the salons are going to be the intelligentsia back in Moscow and maybe St. Petersburg. But the unwashed narod, they don't care.
Right, but one clip on Telegram going viral, which is also a tool that Russians use, would damage him. And I think that is probably the worry.
It doesn't. The only way Putin can be damaged is if the military decides to get involved and topple him, because in the history
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
You're not seeing
exactly what I'm saying.
I don't see any indications of it now. I don't see indications of it in
There's very
Red
much
Star,
indications
in
of nationalists and far-right Russians who are close to the military, people close to Wagner Group, making grumbles, talking about the bad prosecution of the war. So I think there are some indications.
Wishful thinking. It's still wishful.
I think it would be worse.
Well,
actually,
I don't think. Yeah, exactly. It's not a question of wishful thinking. You wouldn't want those guys to be coming in.
Actually worse.
But I do think there's a bit of a worry there on their part, Craig. I think if the people around Putin see that he's beginning to slip and it's no longer in their interest to have that man in that office, they're going to start thinking about who they're going to put in place.
I'm not disagreeing with that premise. What I am saying, let's hold the champagne until we see the military, the military leaves the barracks.
I'm not even going to hold the vodka.
You're right.
Iris Makler, how's the Kremlinology where you are?
I attended one of those Putin fests. I remember when I was in Moscow, when Rob was in Moscow, and they're meaningless in and of themselves, but I think there is a significance to cancelling it at the last minute, not because it means that tomorrow there's going to be a revolution, but I read a lot of the Telegram channels, which is the soldiers, the mobilized soldiers in translation. I don't read them in Russian, and they're pretty grim reading. No uniforms, no medicines left. It reminds me, especially not just around Bakhmut, but it reminds me of World War I. They're digging trenches, they're filled with rain, then with snow, they're wet, they have nowhere to sleep. And extraordinarily to me, they have no commanders. They're just kind of sent out there. And when you read this over and over again, it's quite distressing. And their wives circulate it. And they call their wives. And they have to go and march for 30 kilometres to get food. Now, it's not that I am in favour of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but if you're a mobilised soldier, those are not good conditions. And if that's being reported back in Russia, that's a worry for the Russian leadership. And I can see that because I hear Sovalyov's program as well, the daily morning and night propaganda channel, and he doesn't like it either. So you even have the propagandists saying something's not quite right. Not that tomorrow there'll be a revolution, but I do think that it's a sign that they're worried about something and they haven't got their act together to fix it.
And as you say, Iris, with winter coming scenes now reminiscent of World War I, France 24's team in Donetsk filming Ukrainian troops on Thursday digging trenches in preparation for the next brutal phase of battle in the east. And Rob Parsons, there have been trenches, of course, since 2014 when the war first began. But now for the eastern Donetsk region, these trenches suddenly are taking on this magnified importance.
Yeah, I mean, for the Russians in particular, because I think that most people would agree that there's no particular strategic significance in Bakhmut. Its significance is primarily political. Vladimir Putin has put so much effort, so many lives have been spent, so much artillery has been spent on trying to seize Bakhmut, and so far without any success, that he keeps piling more and more in the hope, rather than expectation, that something will be achieved. If they take Bakhmut, they still have to go through various layers of Ukrainian defense before they can get anywhere near some of the bigger towns in Donetsk. So it's not about that primarily. It's more the political message that Vladimir Putin wants to send to the Russian people, that there are successes, that Russia is ultimately going to win this war.
Far from the battlefield, Russia continuing to target civilians. The second city of Ukraine, Kharkiv, in the dark this Friday. The Kyiv metro out of service after the latest overnight strikes targeting critical infrastructure. It's coming at the tail end of a week where France hosted a Rebuilding Ukraine conference. In the Daily Beast, Craig Kapitas, you quote a senior U.S. intelligence officer as describing the situation as Groundhog Day in a war zone, with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky playing the role of Bill Murray. Bill Murray, the actor who in the film has to relive the same day over and over and over again.
Correct. The military component is quite concerned that people are already scrambling to do deals in a rebuilt Ukraine, and money is being spent either directly or on the side to do this, when the money should be spent on munitions to win the war. That everyone's talking about deals and not enough people are talking about winning the war. There are a number of problems. The two biggest ones are, if they start rebuilding, as Macron says, as soon as a place is liberated, we're going to go in and rebuild it. The military is saying, and correctly, that Putin is going to blow it up again, and you're not going to get insurance for that. You're looking at over $1 trillion in investment. A couple of Patriot missile batteries aren't going to protect this.
Those Patriot missile batteries, which were announced this week by the Pentagon, the first to go to Ukraine.
Right. The CIA, the intelligence guys are saying, look, it's all well and good to rebuild Ukraine, and it's terrible what's happening to them. And yes, we need to bring in the electricity and whatever to help them during the winter. But don't start thinking about rebuilding this place until Putin is taken out of the picture, and his pals. That's the whole feeling, because they're not going to go away.
Iris Makler, the Friday strikes, according, and this is the Ukrainians saying it, something like 73 missiles sent, and most of them intercepted, but not all. The Ukrainians who've gotten better at intercepting these missiles, but the view on what are, in often cases, Iranian-made drones being used.
Yes, and I think that's I'm just thinking about the perspective from Israel on those Iranian-made drones. You know that Israel was walking this fine line between Moscow, who is sitting in Syria on its northern border, and Ukraine. It's perhaps a more natural ally in this circumstance. But I think that the deeper that Russia and Iran get, the closer they get to each other, the more worried Jerusalem becomes, because those drones were actually invented for use here. They see them being used and then factories being built in Russia to make more of them. And I think that's a big concern for Israel. And
Is it a concern, Iris, or is it good news, you might say, for Israel in that they're getting a chance to study how the enemy's working?
Yeah, I don't think they see it as good news. I don't think they see the palling up between Moscow and Tehran as good news. And I don't think they see the use of these weapons in Ukraine as good news. No, I don't. And I do know from analysts that I've spoken to, I haven't spoken to politicians, but I do know that there is a concern about that and a feeling that perhaps below the radar, we are seeing more Israeli help for Ukraine than they admit officially.
Borzo Dargahi?
Yeah, I mean, I think this puts Israel in a tough position. It's tried to play, the kind of Turkey or Saudi game on the Ukraine-Russia war and kind of playing both sides, so to speak. It's under pressure. It's been under pressure from the U.S. To take a more active stance in support of Ukraine. And now it's, facing this a very real strategic dilemma, this deepening of ties between Tehran and Moscow, and a possible the question that Israelis must be asking now is, Tehran is supplying these drones to Russia and these possibly missiles as well. What is Iran getting in return? I think that is really the big question. What will it get in terms of expertise, in terms of technology that it can then transfer to the Levant and use against Israel in any possible war?
I mean, it's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, that must be what the concern of the Israelis is at the moment. Yes. What are they getting in return for those rockets? Yeah.
So if they go against Russia too much, if they support Ukraine too much, it could mean that Moscow will be even more enthusiastic about supporting Iran. That is the dilemma for Israel.
Well, Rob, can I ask you a question? Because I have not been on the ground there. You have. I've been covering the banks and the other whole side of this story for 10 months. It seems to me that this is the first righteous war that's gone on since World War II. This is a real, serious, old-fashioned slugfest war. And it also seems from everyone I've spoken to that a lot of people, the West and NATO, don't really want to go into this as a full-scale war against Russia, but that it's building up to that. You're going to have the A-10 Warthogs come in and take out these SOBs at some point. What's the feeling on the ground with the Ukrainians about this turning into a full-tilt boogie war with NATO involvement at some point, as opposed to the Ukrainians getting patriots and all this other stuff and pats on the back from Macron and fighting the war for them?
I mean, first such war in Europe, certainly. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not in the world. I mean, there have been several around the world. But I think really the feeling in Ukraine at this moment is they can deal with this by themselves.
Really?
They don't need NATO to come in. What they need is NATO's weapons, certainly.
Right.
They certainly want more air defense. They certainly want aircraft. They've been demanding aircraft, calling for aircraft since the beginning of the war. And primarily at the moment, what they really want are tanks. They're really pissed off with the Germans for blocking the supply of tanks via Switzerland. That's it. I mean, they just say, look, we can do it. I was just reading the Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny the other day saying, look, we can win this. We know that. As Commander-in-Chief, I know I can win this war, but I need the equipment. I know I can give you the list of what I need: the tanks, the armored personnel carriers, the rocket systems, the aircraft. I don't need your men. We've got at least 700,000 men under arms. I'm more in reserve. Give us the weapons. That's what they're saying.
And you get that feeling on the ground as well that they could take Putin out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no. They're not going to take Putin out by themselves, but they can have an effect on Russian politics by achieving military progress on the ground.
Robert Parsons, when you were in the city of Nikopol, that's near the Moscow-controlled Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the anger was definitely palpable. Let's take a listen.
The thoughts of Russians as our brothers and sisters. I never imagined something like this could happen. How could Russia commit such an abomination? I can't understand them, and I will never forgive them for all the terrible things they have done.
And this is in the Russian-speaking east of Ukraine that she's talking.
Russian-speaking woman. She was talking to me in Russian through that window there. Her hands trembling from Parkinson's disease, which she told me she'd had for 20 years. She's 83. She couldn't leave. I asked her why she didn't leave, and she said she couldn't because she was just not physically fit enough to do it, and she didn't really have anywhere to go to. She was stuck there, and she was saying, "Look, what on earth is this all about? What?" Why? Why on earth are they doing this? What is all this rubbish they've told us about brotherhood in the past? Where is this brotherhood now? What are you doing this for? And then this is an abomination, and I will never forgive them for it. It was one of the strongest sort of witness moments I got when I was there this time round.
Iris Makler, you're about to have a new government in Israel, and we remember Benjamin Netanyahu, who in a previous incarnation as prime minister, attending the May 9th celebrations in Moscow. What kind of rapport will he have with Vladimir Putin?
That's an excellent question. He does have a rapport with Vladimir Putin. They're both they're long-lived leaders. They met each other a lot. It was a change, a break in Russian policy, the friendship towards Israel. But I think now that's definitely cooling. And what Netanyahu promises is that he can restore it. He blames that short-lived previous government, as he blames them for many, many things, for the decline in the relationship. But I think it's a reality. It's a geopolitical reality, the decline in the relationship. And I'm not sure that as good as his relationship with Putin is, his personal relationship, that what we're seeing on the ground, what we're seeing with Iran, what benefits Iran will demand from Russia in return for its cooperation, and whether those benefits will be aimed against Israel, that all of those things, I think, will make it very hard for him to have the same glowing relationship he had earlier.
All right, so Vladimir Putin to no longer someone you want to have your picture taken with, except is Russia still winning hearts and minds in Africa? The head of Putin's private army calling for France to be deemed a state sponsor of terror, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who heads the mercenaries of Wagner, blaming Paris for a letter bomb that seriously injured the head of Russia House, which its branch in the capital of the Central African Republic. The French staunchly deny. There's no proof of a link to the French, the former colonial power in Bangui, which this Thursday pulled out its last troops from there. And Borzu Daragahi, there is, again, we talked about the World Cup and its perception sitting here in Europe, how it could be different in the rest of the world. The perception of this war 10 months in outside of Europe, is it evolving? Is it changing?
No, not really. And I think that, in some respects, the West has, no one else but itself to blame for that. Does anyone even know that there's a horrific war in the north of Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, where it's been described as the worst humanitarian
Biden
disaster.
administration this week hosting this big U.S.-Africa summit?
Yes, but not really addressing this issue. It's not something that we talk about for 30 minutes on TV. So I get where people in Africa and Latin America are coming from.
Yeah. And Congo as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're supposed to get all teary-eyed about your wars, but our people in the global south are being torn apart in wars, often with your weapons and your sponsors, and no one cares about that. So why should we care about you? So I understand the sentiment, even if I don't necessarily agree with it.
The rising star of Turkey's opposition just got a lot of free publicity. He also got a ban from politics and a 2-year, 7-month jail sentence. Istanbul's mayor appealing. Thousands turning out Thursday in support of 52-year-old Ekrem İmamoğlu, who points to the timing of his conviction because he'd called the Supreme Electoral Council idiots 6 months ahead of elections where President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has to overcome skyrocketing inflation, and incumbent fatigue.
The ruling party ordered a certain verdict to be issued by the court. They wanted to imprison me. Furthermore, when they realized that the original judge would not give the decision they wanted, they exiled him and brought in another judge to decide.
So Ekrem İmamoğlu, Borzo Dargahi, he was almost prevented from becoming mayor of Istanbul. They reran the election, and this time he won by a landslide. Will lightning strike twice in his favor in this case?
I mean, it remains to be seen. And, the sentence against him, the ban on politics, the prison sentence, which likely won't be carried out for technical reasons, they still have to be confirmed on appeal. And, until that appeal is confirmed, the ban on politics will not take hold. But, this is just, it shows, on the one hand, the extreme twisting of Turkish institutions under Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And on the other hand, I think I've met İmamoğlu a few times. I've seen him speak. And, we're maybe as little as 4 months before an election. It could happen as early as March. And, these guys, these opposition guys, just do not have their act together. And, finally, I see some passion in this video that we're seeing, but they've been bickering among themselves and arguing about who gets to be the presidential candidate from among the opposition figures and so on. And they've been not really going out and knocking on doors and campaigning or trying to recruit people into their opposition fold. So, they've not been a very effective opposition. And, ironically...
Why is that?
I think there's a bunch of institutional reasons. I think it's a complicated story. I think that the Turkish civil institutions are kind of lacking and lack development. And, İmamoğlu, ironically, is actually a kind of natural politician. He's he can be a decent speaker. People like him, but there's a lot of political figures in the Turkish orbit who are just not inspiring. Unlike Erdogan, who's good on the stump and a pretty talented tactical politician.
Craig Kapitas.
Oh, Tayyip is the perfect tyrant. He's really smart. He's really wonderful, and he's really old, like all of these other guys. He controls everything, and he's been. He used to be the great Democrat.
So that makes him unstoppable if he controls everything.
Of course he's unstoppable. I mean, the question is, when the elections come, is he going to allow anyone else except himself to win the election? I think the answer to that, and I'd be happy to bet a simit or whatever you'd like right now, that he's not going to allow that to happen. He starts. He says, "Oh, we're going." Remember, he's a member of NATO, don't you know? Lest we forget, and he's talking about sending Turkish missiles into Athens, and he's also attached to to Putin's hip. Let's not forget this. Putin needs Erdogan, and Tayyip needs old Putin for energy, for building nuclear reactors, for using Turkey as a kind of hole in the wall for Russian oligarchs who are going to hide out, and the thing you hear is, well, the economy is just collapsing, which it is and has been for quite some time. But Francois, it really takes a long time for a nation state to collapse. Look at Iran. They create their own little ecosystem. They did it in North Korea. They've done it in Iran. And that's and they've done it in Russia. And now you're seeing that same kind of totalitarian ecosystem being created in Turkey, and it's really hard to crack.
Yeah, I'm not sure it takes a collapse of the Turkish economy to get rid of Erdogan. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. He's a very talented politician. He'd be very hard to remove, and he's ruthless. But he has, if I remember rightly, lost control of major cities, through not just Istanbul, but other cities, Ankara, Bursa as well.
That's right,
he lost control of. It shows he can lose. I think it quite possible this time if the opposition get their act together, and maybe there haven't been many signs so far.
He's a smart, tactical politician. He makes very big mistakes on the strategic and long-term front. We have to note also, polls consistently show him losing. And many of the things that he's doing, including perhaps, and we're not sure exactly what happened.
So does it matter who the CHP puts up? Can they put up a bologna sandwich and it wins?
That's what some people speculate, but I'm not sure. I mean,
they're
some
old.
people have
All
said
the
that.
opposition guys are really old. One of the problems in Turkey for years.
Not Imam
Imam
Well,
He's younger than me.
Well, he's younger, but one of the problems has been the flight of young Turks because they just didn't want to stick around, and get.
But they'll vote. Even those ones that are living in Europe, they will trust me. The Turkish.
It's not if they vote; it's who counts the votes. And I just do not at this point see Erdogan allowing any opposition to beat him. And you're right about the three major cities. Always going, not voting for Erdogan. But I just don't see it. He's a canny old SOB. That guy.
Robert Parsons, while this is happening, the triangulation, but as Craig was describing it, between NATO on the one side and Russia on the other, and Erdogan in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see them as being attached to the hip, like Craig said, but they certainly, Erdogan is playing a long game with Putin. If he can ditch Putin, he'd be very happy to do so. He needs Putin to a degree, obviously, in Syria at the moment, and he needs the energy supply from Russia as well. But he's watching what's happening in Ukraine too. He sees that things are not going well for Putin in Russia. He's a part of NATO. He sees that economically, Turkey is much more attached to the West than it is to Russia. So I think long term, his interests lie not with Russia, but with the West.
It's a cold winter, and Erdogan has a big election.
Because it gets cold in Turkey in winter.
Erdogan has a big election coming up. That cheap energy from Russia is a quick fix for that. He could very well say, "Hey, Germany and France, you don't have elections to worry about coming up this year, and I do. So I have to, I have to cut some kind of deal with this guy. A, he's my neighbor. B, we control the Black Sea together pretty much, and C, I need this gas, and I see where he's coming from. Meanwhile, as everyone knows, militarily, spiritually almost, Turkey supports Ukraine in this war.
It supports Ukraine, the Turkish people.
Well, not just the Turkish people, but the Turkish defense industry in
the
terms
drones,
of the drones that have been supplying
Bayraktar
and other weapons and defense cooperation agreements and so on.
So Iris Maklo, what Borzu's describing sounds a lot like Turkey's position is like Israel's, playing nice with both sides, but beneath the surface, when you scratch the veneer, public opinion squarely going one way.
Yeah, I can see that. I was just thinking back through the drones, which I hadn't focused on that enough. Yes, so it is a complicated, I guess it's complicated for many countries in the world. You look at the changes in Europe, not just this week, and the changes in gas policy that is going to be a result of this war with Ukraine further down the line. And you can see that many countries, the closer they are to Russia, have very complex relations with them. And Israel now regards itself as close to Russia because of Russia's presence in Syria. So anybody who shares a border of any kind with Russia is in a complicated position. And that applies to Israel by proxy, to Iran and to Turkey.
And it certainly has been an eventful week in other former Soviet states like Armenia and Azerbaijan. So much more to talk about on this. Iris Makler, thank you so much for being with us from Jerusalem. I want to thank Craig Kapitis, Borzu Dargahi, Robert Parsons. Join us next week for The World This Year, our retrospective of all that's happened in 2022. Bye for now.